Billionaire sees Waitress lift her son to the piano. What he does next shocks the restaurant. Claire's hands trembled as she balanced a towering tray of steaming dishes. The hum of crisp tablecloths being spread, the clink of cutlery, and the usual nightly chaos of the upscale restaurant enveloped her in a dizzying swirl. But amidst the elegant chatter of sophisticated guests, something was stirring inside Claire's heart, something that would shake the routine of her life forever. When her young son Ethan wandered curiously toward a glossy grand piano in the restaurant's corner, Claire's maternal instinct told her to let him explore. Little did she know, a keen-eyed billionaire sitting in the shadows was watching Ethan's every move. Claire Watkins felt her pulse thrum in her ears as she approached table number 7. The restaurant, an illustrious establishment known as Le Papillon Doré, had a well-deserved reputation for its exquisite French-Asian fusion cuisine and breathtaking interior design. Glass chandeliers shaped like fluttering butterflies caught the light, and floor-to-ceiling windows provided a view of the city's sparkling skyline. It was a place where the wealthy mingled, celebrated, and sometimes sealed deals worth millions. That evening, Claire's long black hair was pinned up into a practical chignon, a few silky strands tumbling free whenever she rushed to fulfill an order. Her uniform, classic black slacks and a spotless white blouse showed signs of the constant bustle of her work, a faint sauce stain on her shoulder, a small wet patch from an accidental splash by the kitchen sink. But she carried herself with dignity. She never let her posture slump, never let exhaustion settle in her eyes, for she needed every ounce of energy to provide for her 7-year-old son, Ethan. At only 27, Claire had faced her fair share of trials. She'd grown up dreaming of becoming a professional pianist. After all, her mother, Marianne Watkins, used to play lullabies and classical sonatas on an old upright piano in their modest living room. Claire's father had been a simple clerk who saved every spare cent to pay for piano lessons that nurtured her talent. She was good. Her teachers had praised her nimble fingers and her excellent ear. She even performed in small recitals across the city, earning scholarships that seemed to promise a brighter tomorrow. But life took a turn when Claire found herself pregnant at 19. She was in love with her high school sweetheart, a restless musician named Henry. Together they believed they could face the world, until Henry's aspirations of rock stardom overtook his sense of responsibility. He disappeared shortly after Ethan was born, leaving Claire to juggle motherhood part-time jobs and her fading dreams of performing on stage. Still, the memory of those graceful, euphoric moments at the piano never left her. Sometimes, after her shift, she would linger around the restaurant's glistening black grand piano. It was perched near the stage, where a rotating schedule of local pianists entertained guests with jazz renditions and romantic ballads. Claire wasn't allowed to play it without permission. Company policy was strict. The instrument was off-limits to staff, except for those specifically hired as pianists. But she would stand there for a moment, run her fingertips over the black and white keys when no one was watching, and recall how joyous it felt to play. Now, as she delivered plates of duck confit and seared tuna to table 7, Claire tried not to think about her passions. She was doing her job, and that had to be enough. Yet that very night, the universe had something in store for her, something she couldn't have predicted. In a far corner of the restaurant, unassuming in his tailored suit, sat Jackson Morrow, a billionaire investor known in certain business circles for his quiet philanthropic efforts. He wasn't the type to show off his wealth on social media or star in flashy interviews. Instead, Jackson frequented philanthropic galas and maintained a low profile in the public eye. That night he'd arrived with only one companion, a thick, hardcover book on classical composers. He wanted a moment of reprieve, some solitude away from the hustle of his high-stakes business acquisitions. His presence went largely unnoticed. The staff had recognized his name on the reservation list, but he'd requested no special treatment. To him, an evening with good food and gentle piano music in the background was more than enough. Claire's shift was nearly over. She had promised Ethan, who was staying at a friend's apartment across the street, that she would pick him up after the dinner rush, but at about 9:30, the friend's older sibling delivered an anxious message. They had an emergency to attend, so could Claire pick Ethan up earlier? She had no choice. She called her manager, Frank Hudson, to see if she could briefly step out. Frank was a kind but perpetually stressed man, nearing his 50s. With thinning hair and creases around his eyes, he sympathized with Claire's situation. However, the restaurant was slammed. The famous chef Monique Leblanc, one of Chef Gordon Ramsay's protégés, had curated a limited edition menu, attracting extra attention. Nonetheless, Frank granted Claire 10 minutes to dash outside, gather her son, and bring him back inside temporarily until she could finish her shift. The moment she re-entered, breathless, Ethan clung to her hand, his bright blue eyes wide in awe at the restaurant's sparkling decor. He'd never seen such grandeur up close. They walked through the busy dining floor, weaving around servers, balancing trays of exotic dishes, making their way to an empty corner near the staff station. "You can sit here, sweetheart," she whispered. She removed her jacket, spread it on a chair for him, and offered him a pad of paper and colored pencils. "Just color quietly. I'll be back when I can." "Okay." Ethan nodded quietly, absorbing the bustle of the place. But kids are kids, and curiosity always has a way of seeping in. Soon he began to wander, his small feet padding softly over the polished marble floor, until he reached the black grand piano. The pianist on duty had just gone on a break, so the piano stood unoccupied. Its lid was propped open, gleaming under the golden lights. Ethan stared at it, entranced by its elegance. In his short life, he'd only seen upright pianos in pictures and in the cheap practice rooms Claire sometimes rented to keep her passion alive. This was entirely different, a symbol of grandeur he didn't fully understand, but sensed was special. He looked around for his mother, but didn't see her. At that moment, Claire was juggling a new table of demanding guests. As Ethan's curiosity soared, he extended a tiny hand, pressing a single key. A sharp, bright note resonated. From his table nearby, Jackson Morrow watched with mild amusement. The child seemed so focused, so careful not to cause too much noise. There was a glimmer of wonder in the boy's eyes that reminded Jackson of his own childhood, dreamy and full of potential. He closed his book, deciding to observe a little more. Ethan gently tapped another key, then another as though testing them. Sensing no immediate scolding, he sank onto the pianist's bench. In no time, he began plucking out a playful melody, disjointed but surprisingly musical for a child of his age. A few heads turned, but the restaurant chatter continued to dominate the background. That was until Claire spotted him. Her heart skipped a beat. She quickly apologized to her guests and rushed over, attempting to quietly coax Ethan away from the piano before she lost her job. But there was something in her son's expression that halted her, a raw, pure fascination she recognized from her own childhood. He was so immersed, so alive in that moment. "Ethan, sweetie," she whispered, "we can't be here. This piano isn't for us." He looked up, disappointed. "Why not?" "I was just playing." Claire hesitated, her cheeks flushing with a mixture of embarrassment and longing. In a burst of maternal protectiveness, she scanned the room. realized that the staff pianist was still nowhere to be found, and acting on instinct, lifted her son so that his tiny feet rested on the pedals. She guided his hands to the keys properly, showing him a simple chord progression. A hush fell over the surrounding diners, who noticed this tableau, the waitress still wearing her apron, standing behind her son as he sat at the grand piano. The moment was equal parts tender and rebellious, and in the far corner, Jackson Morrow leaned forward, interest piqued. Something stirred within him, an old memory, a sense of gratitude for those who had guided him when he was young and curious. He laid his napkin aside, stood up, and began walking toward them. As Ethan pressed the keys, Claire gently hummed a simple tune in his ear. She realized she was crossing a line. Staff members weren't allowed to use the piano without explicit permission, let alone bring children onto the premises. She risked incurring Frank's wrath, but her heart told her to let Ethan have just a taste of something magical. She couldn't deprive him of that wonder. The melodic notes resonated gently, weaving into the subdued conversation of the guests. A few paused mid-bite, turning their heads in curiosity. A slender woman at a neighboring table softly tapped her husband's arm to draw his attention to the scene. The hush rippled outward, as if the entire restaurant was collectively holding its breath to see what would happen next. That was when Jackson Morrow approached them. "Excuse me," he said softly, his voice warm and calm. Claire jumped, spinning to face him. Her first instinct was to apologize profusely. She recognized him from news articles, though he was rarely in tabloids. His name occasionally popped up in pieces about major philanthropic endeavors or business conferences. He was a tall man in his early 40s, with salt and pepper hair and an unassuming grace. "I'm so sorry." Claire breathed, her chest tightening. "My son, he loves pianos, and I just let him." Jackson raised a hand in a gentle gesture for her to stop apologizing. "He seems to have a natural ear," he said, then turned to Ethan. "Would you like to keep playing?" Ethan nodded shyly. Claire blinked, her cheeks aflame. She sensed all eyes on them. She could practically feel the stares of the restaurant patrons. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. The last thing she wanted was to get fired. Frank had been kind, but she knew how strict the rules were in this high-end place. "Let me talk to your manager," Jackson offered. Before Claire could protest, he strode off. She watched helplessly as her son's hands stilled on the keys. A wave of panic washed over her. If Jackson was upset, he had enough influence to have her immediately dismissed. She feared the worst, because stories abounded of powerful men who didn't tolerate any breach of etiquette. Her mind swam with images of rent overdue, her son needing new shoes, bills piling up. Moments later, Jackson returned with Frank in tow, and it seemed they had reached some sort of understanding. Frank's expression was hard to read, but he didn't look angry, more dazed than anything. Jackson offered Claire a reassuring smile. "It's all fine," Jackson said. "No one's upset." Then turning to Ethan, he added, "The manager said, you can finish your little recital if you keep it short, and if your mom has the time." Claire released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Thank you," she whispered, voice trembling. She bowed her head in gratitude, then leaned down to her son. "Ethan, do you want to play the piece we practiced at home?" The boy nodded eagerly, and Claire helped him shape his little hands on the keys. Though Ethan was only 7, she had taught him some basics using her mother's old method books. He wasn't exactly Mozart, but he had a surprising knack for memory and rhythm. He managed a very simple arrangement of Fur Elise with Claire, occasionally guiding his fingers to the correct notes. The melody drifted through the restaurant, capturing everyone's attention. The hush turned into a spellbound reverence. Even the clinking of silverware ceased. By the time Ethan finished, a smattering of applause broke out from nearby tables. A group of diners who had come from a corporate function raised their glasses in appreciation. Claire's eyes glistened with tears, tears of joy, pride, and relief. She lifted Ethan from the bench, hugging him. Then she remembered where she was, and her cheeks burned in embarrassment. She turned to the crowd with a polite bow. But it was Jackson who stepped forward, addressing the small audience. "That was quite impressive, young man," he said. "I think we just saw a rising star." A moment later, the everyday hustle of the restaurant resumed. The overhead music continued. Waiters brought out fresh courses, but the mood had shifted. A mother's pride and a boy's curiosity had broken through the veneer of sophistication, reminding everyone present of the simple joy of music. Little did Claire know this was the beginning of an extraordinary chapter in her life, one that would lead to alliances with powerful figures, resurrected passions, and shocking revelations. Because Jackson Morrow wasn't done with his night, and fate had a way of weaving dreams into reality, no matter how improbable they might seem. It was close to closing time when Claire finally brought Jackson his check. Her heart fluttered with anxiety. She wondered if he would file a complaint, or if he would tip generously. So much depended on how he perceived that brief moment of rule-breaking. To her surprise, Jackson invited her to sit down. "I'd like to speak with you if you have a minute," he said, glancing at the manager for approval. Frank gave a brief nod and returned to his duties. Clearly, Jackson's presence carried weight. Claire lowered herself onto the chair opposite him, carefully folding her apron. She felt awkward, like a student about to be reprimanded by the principal. "Your son Jackson," began, his voice kind. "He has a real spark." "How long has he been playing?" Claire exhaled a shaky breath. "Only about a year, on and off. We can't afford a proper piano at home, so we make do with a cheap keyboard. I try to teach him what I remember from my own lessons, but it's not the same." Jackson nodded thoughtfully. He seemed so comfortable at the piano. "You did too. There's a certain connection there. You looked at home when you were guiding him." A flush of color tinted Claire's cheeks. She thought about her childhood dreams, all the recitals, the trophies, the modest scholarships. She had never made it to a grand conservatory or performed in a prestigious concert hall. Life had intervened too soon. "I wanted to become a professional pianist once upon a time," she murmured. "But it didn't work out." Jackson paused, tapping his fingers on the table. "I believe in second chances," he said quietly. "I also believe in nurturing talent when you see it." What if he cleared his throat, as if deciding how much he should reveal? What if I told you I have some connections in the music world? I could arrange for Ethan to receive proper lessons, maybe even a scholarship at a reputable music school. Claire's heart pounded. This was surreal. "I don't know how to thank you," she stammered. Her first instinct was to politely decline, because it seemed too big, too sudden. But the image of Ethan's future rose clearly in her mind. A chance for him to pursue something he truly loved, something she had lost. "You don't need to thank me," Jackson said, his gaze earnest. "But I'd like to hear more about your story, about what happened to your dream." She hesitated. Could she trust him? He was, after all, a near stranger, but something about his gentle demeanor and sincerity melted her reservations. Briefly, she told him about Henry, about being a single mother, about the burden of rent and bills that forced her to drop any pursuit of professional music. And my mother passed away last year," she added, voice quivering slightly. "She was my biggest supporter. Her old upright piano is still at our family home, but it's in dire need of repair. I can't even afford that." Jackson nodded, silent for a moment. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said. Then, in a matter-of-fact tone, "I'd like to help. For Ethan's sake, and for yours. Talent shouldn't be stifled by financial constraints." Tears threatened to spill from Claire's eyes. She wasn't used to handouts. She'd prided herself on making her own way. Yet the maternal part of her, the part that wanted the best for her son, couldn't ignore this opportunity. Why, she managed to ask, her voice fragile, "Why would you do that for us?" Jackson's expression softened. "Because when I was a kid, someone did the same for me. I grew up in a rough neighborhood. I had a mentor who saw potential in me. He paid for my first summer courses in economics and coding. Everything I am today is because someone took a chance on me. Now I try to do the same whenever I can." Claire's lips parted in awe. She glanced at Ethan, who was now dozing on a chair, the excitement of the evening having lulled him into a comfortable sleep. The choice seemed clear. It was a gift she couldn't possibly turn away from. "All right," she whispered, voice trembling. "I accept. For Ethan. Thank you." Jackson smiled, pulling out a sleek, matte black business card. "Call me, and we'll arrange the details. I'll schedule an audition with a friend of mine, who's a well-respected instructor." He paused. "And if you want to pick up your own playing, I could help there too. Maybe sponsor you for some advanced piano lessons. You're obviously skilled, and it would be a shame to let that talent go to waste." Claire stared at the card in her hand, struggling to comprehend her sudden change in fortune. It was as if all the nights of double shifts, the tears shed in solitude, and the silent prayers for a break had culminated in this moment. She could only nod her mind, reeling with gratitude and disbelief. Little did she know this was just the start. In the weeks to come, she would discover deeper layers to Jackson's motives, secrets about his own past, and an opportunity that would test every ounce of courage she possessed. Because life rarely hands out gifts without also administering tests, and Claire's test was about to begin. In the days that followed, Claire's world whirled with new energy. She contacted Jackson the next morning, and true to his word, he arranged a meeting with a renowned music teacher, Madame Beatrice Choi, who had taught prodigies that went on to prestigious conservatories. The arrangement was set. Ethan would receive weekly lessons at a heavily subsidized rate, courtesy of Jackson. If Ethan's talent proved promising, more assistance would follow. Claire couldn't help but feel as though she were living someone else's life. Between waitressing shifts, she found herself ferrying Ethan to lessons in a neighborhood far wealthier than her own. The first time they arrived, a stately house with white columns and a manicured garden greeted them. They stepped inside to see lavish furniture, an antique chandelier, and walls adorned with framed concert posters. Ethan looked around in awe, but Claire noticed his posture stiffen. He was out of his comfort zone. They were welcomed by Madame Choi, a petite woman with sharp eyes and a gracious smile. "So you're the young man who impressed Mr. Morrow," she said in a gentle accent. Ethan nodded, wide-eyed. Madame Choi guided him to a shimmering black piano in a sunlit practice room. She asked him to play something he knew by heart. Ethan faltered, a bit nerves showing in the slight tremble of his fingers. Claire, standing in the corner, offered an encouraging smile, and soon the notes of Fur Elise danced hesitantly through the air. The instructor listened with a discerning ear, her face neutral. When Ethan finished, she pursed her lips thoughtfully. "He has potential," she said at last. But we need to develop technique ear training music theory. He must start from the basics. It will be a long journey. Claire's shoulders relaxed in relief. There was no immediate dismissal of her boy's hopes. Over the next hour, she watched Madame Choi correct Ethan's posture, guide his hands across scales, and introduce him to exercises meant to increase dexterity. For the first time, Claire saw the spark of real dedication in Ethan's eyes. This was more than a passing fancy. When the lesson concluded, Madame Choi turned to Claire. "Your son is lucky. Not many children in his situation get such an opportunity. But luck alone isn't enough. He must practice daily, maybe even more than an hour a day, if he wants to keep up." Claire nodded resolutely. "We'll do whatever it takes," she promised. As they left, Claire saw Jackson waiting outside near his sleek car, engaged in conversation on his phone. She caught snippets of phrases about merger and board approval and realized just how high-powered his world was. When he noticed them, he ended the call and offered a friendly wave. "How did it go?" he asked, opening the car door for them. Claire beamed. "She'll take him on as a student. This is, unbelievable. We can't thank you enough." Jackson merely shrugged, smiling. "Sometimes all it takes is a helping hand. I'm looking forward to seeing him progress." That day marked a turning point for both mother and son. Soon Ethan's after-school routine included music theory worksheets, scale practice, and memorizing short classical pieces. Claire juggled her schedule to ensure she could supervise his practice. Their cramped apartment reverberated with the electronic tones of the cheap keyboard, but it was enough to keep the momentum going. The second chance Jackson had extended went beyond just the lessons. He also hinted at a renovation of Claire's mother's upright piano, offering to cover the cost of repairs. Claire initially resisted accepting the lessons. For Ethan was one thing, but the cost of a piano renovation felt like an even bigger favor. In the end, Jackson's persistence and her father's urging swayed her. "Your mother would want that piano to be played," her father told her one day on a phone call. "If you can bring it back to life, you should." So with a mixture of apprehension and excitement, Claire agreed. The day the piano restorers arrived at her parents' old house was a day she never forgot. The upright had been a fixture of her childhood, its keys yellowed with age, its chipped edges filled with memories of her mother, singing late into the night. Now it would have a second life, just like her dreams. Yet life never moves in a straight line. Even as Ethan showed promise, and as Claire dared to imagine a future in music again, challenges lurked. The manager at Le Papillon Doré informed her that certain wealthy patrons had started questioning the presence of Ethan in the restaurant at night. Some demanded that staff maintain a strictly professional environment. No children allowed, they insisted. Frank tried to shield Claire, but there were complaints, especially from a new wave of customers who booked tables months in advance. Moreover, rumors circulated among her co-workers. Whispers that Claire had hooked a billionaire and might be angling for favoritism. The jealousy was palpable. One colleague sneered behind her back. "She's probably just trying to climb the ladder through him. Rich guys have a thing for waitresses, don't they?" But the biggest source of tension came from Henry Ethan's estranged father. Word reached him through mutual acquaintances that Claire and Ethan were receiving the patronage of a wealthy man. Henry reappeared, suddenly claiming to want to reconnect with his son. Claire was blindsided when Henry showed up at her apartment door one evening, guitar in hand, sporting the same devil-may-care grin she remembered from her teenage years. She gazed at him, an amalgam of old feelings, swirling anger at his abandonment, pity for his aimless existence, and a flicker of fear that he might disrupt Ethan's fragile new routine. Henry's hair was longer, his clothes wrinkled. He smelled faintly of alcohol. "Hey, Claire Bear," he said, using the old pet name that once made her heart flutter. Now it only irritated her. "Heard our kid's got a sugar daddy paying for piano lessons, so I thought I'd drop by." She folded her arms. "Don't call him that. Jackson's just a generous benefactor, and Ethan's my son. Don't you suddenly pop up acting like a father." Now, Henry said, lifting his hands in mock surrender. "A man's allowed to see his kid. Maybe I can offer him some guitar lessons, too. Keep that musical talent going in the family. Huh?" His tone was light-hearted, but Claire detected an undercurrent of greed. She wondered if Henry had illusions of tapping into Jackson's deep pockets for his own benefit. She also recalled the heartbreak and disappointment Henry had caused when Ethan was still a newborn, and she refused to let him hurt them again. "You can see him," she relented for Ethan's sake. "But on my terms, and if you try anything, I'll call the cops." Henry smirked, as if her threat was inconsequential. Sure, Mama Bear. Calm down. Let's just keep it chill. I want to see my boy." Reluctantly, Claire allowed him in, and Henry greeted Ethan with a big show of fatherly affection. Ethan, for his part, was polite but hesitant, having no real memories of Henry's presence in his life. The evening ended without major incident, but the tension was thick. Henry left a promise in the air to return soon, and Claire was left with a gnawing dread. She couldn't hide her concern from Jackson. When he found her looking worried during one of Ethan's lessons, he asked, "Is everything okay?" And she reluctantly spilled the details about Henry's sudden reappearance. Jackson listened intently, his jaw tightening slightly. "Just be careful," he advised. "I don't want Ethan's progress disrupted. Maybe consider legal advice about custody or guardianship. I can help with that if you want." Claire was torn between gratitude and a sense of vulnerability. She barely knew Jackson's personal life. Why was he going to such lengths to help them? Was this normal charity, or was there something more behind his generosity? For now, she decided to trust him. But Henry's presence loomed like a storm cloud on the horizon, and storms by nature often bring devastation before the skies clear again. The weeks turned into months, and Ethan progressed rapidly under Madame Choi's guidance. Claire, for her part, found herself with a renewed desire to practice too. One evening after her shift, she returned to her parents' old house. The newly restored upright piano gleamed in the living room. With trembling hands, she lifted the fallboard, revealing pristine white keys that had been cleaned and repaired. The resonance of the instrument was fuller and richer than she ever remembered. Tentatively, she began to play. An old Chopin prelude came to mind. The muscle memory never truly vanished. The notes tumbled out in gentle waves, first haltingly, then with increasing assurance. As she played, tears slipped down her cheeks. She felt her mother's spirit in the room, encouraging her, guiding her. In that cathartic moment, she resolved something quietly within herself. She wouldn't waste this second chance. Not long after, Jackson invited Claire and Ethan to a formal charity event, where a small group of young musicians would perform. The event was set in a lavish concert hall downtown, often used by the city's symphony orchestra. Although Claire felt out of place in the swirling crowd of elegantly dressed patrons and sponsors, she couldn't deny the thrill of seeing Ethan among children who shared his passion. Jackson, wearing a tailored tuxedo, introduced them to high-profile individuals, CEOs of tech firms, wealthy philanthropists, even a politician or two. Claire felt overwhelmed, But Jackson's presence was reassuring. He gently steered conversations, ensuring Claire and Ethan weren't left awkwardly adrift. It was at this event she overheard murmurs about Jackson's own life. A group of older gentlemen whispered about Jackson's late wife, an accomplished violinist who had died in a tragic accident years ago. Suddenly, his affinity for music, his sponsorship of talented youth made sense. Claire understood that part of his heart might still be devoted to a lost love who once graced concert stages with her own brilliance. When the performances commenced, Ethan sat mesmerized. The children's orchestra played a medley of classical pieces. A teenage prodigy stunned the audience with a violin concerto. The haunting beauty of it brought tears to Claire's eyes. Ethan leaned forward in his seat, wide-eyed with admiration. During the intermission, they retreated to the lobby for refreshments. That was when Henry chose to make an appearance. Clad in a worn leather jacket and jeans, he looked like a fish out of water among the black tie elegance. Claire tensed the moment she saw him approach Jackson with a casual, almost smug posture. "Well, well," Henry drawled, "so you're the famous Jackson Morrow, the guy bankrolling my son's piano lessons." Jackson's brow furrowed. He glanced at Claire, who looked mortified, but he extended his hand politely. "Henry, I presume Ethan's father?" "That's right," Henry responded, ignoring the offered handshake. "Claire told me about you. Gotta say, this is quite a fancy shindig. Kids in tuxes, millionaires throwing money around for charity. Never thought my boy would be part of this crowd." Jackson kept his composure. "We're here to support the arts to encourage young talents like Ethan. I hope you'll stay and enjoy the concert." Henry scoffed, his eyes flicking around the opulent lobby. "Sure, if there's free drinks." Then with a sarcastic grin, he added, "By the way, you mind if I pick your brain about some investments? I got this band project that needs funding." Claire felt a surge of anger and embarrassment. She grabbed Henry's arm. "Stop it. This is neither the time nor place." Jackson shook his head politely. "I'm here to support Ethan, not to discuss personal business ventures. Let's keep the focus on him tonight." Henry rolled his eyes. Right. The kid's always the center of attention, isn't he?" His voice turned bitter. "Well, I guess that's what happens when Mum picks the right sponsor." Claire's cheeks flamed. She shot Henry a furious glare, wishing she could banish him from the event from her life. Sensing the tension, Jackson placed a calming hand on Claire's shoulder, guiding both her and Ethan away. "I'm sorry," she muttered once they were out of earshot. "He's never satisfied unless he's stirring up trouble." Jackson offered her a sympathetic look. "We can't control other people's behavior, only our reactions. Don't let him ruin Ethan's big night." He gave Ethan a gentle smile. "You enjoy the performance, okay, buddy?" Ethan nodded, looking somewhat rattled by his father's sudden appearance. Claire hugged her son, murmuring reassuring words into his ear. For a moment she wondered if Henry would escalate his demands. She could feel the storm building. Henry's disruptive presence at the charity event was only the beginning. He started popping up unannounced at Ethan's lessons with Madame Choi, injecting himself into the conversation, criticizing the classical repertoire, insisting Ethan incorporate more cool music. Madame Choi, usually unflappable, grew irritated by his interference. Claire's patience wore thin. One afternoon, she confronted Henry outside the practice studio. "Why are you doing this?" she demanded. "You never cared about Ethan's music before." He shrugged, lighting a cigarette, despite the no smoking sign. "Maybe I'm turning over a new leaf. Don't I deserve a chance to be a father?" "You walked out on him," Claire hissed. now that someone else is helping him succeed. You're back. It's not fair to him. Henry exhaled a plume of smoke, eyeing her with a mix of resentment and desperation. Times change. People change. You've changed hooking up with this billionaire. She slapped him, fury blazing in her eyes. Don't you dare insinuate that I'm hooking up with anyone. Jackson is just helping, and it's none of your business. Henry sneered, rubbing his cheek. Everyone's got a price, Claire. Don't be naive. This guy wants something. Maybe it's just the satisfaction of playing hero. But there's always a catch. Before she could retort, the studio door opened, and Ethan stepped out, looking worried. Claire softened her voice, muttering a final warning to Henry. She gently guided Ethan away, ignoring Henry's glare. But Henry wouldn't be dissuaded so easily. A week later, he cornered Jackson in the restaurant's parking lot after hours. The staff had mostly gone home. Claire was inside finishing paperwork. Henry, leaning against Jackson's sleek black sedan, blocked Jackson's path as he approached. "You want to buy me out, man?" Henry said, arms crossed. "Let's talk turkey. I know you want Ethan to be free of distractions. How much to make me disappear?" Jackson's eyes narrowed. "Is that what you think of your own son?" "A distraction. You'd abandon him for money." Henry shrugged, unashamed. "I got needs. You got the cash. We can settle it like men." Jackson's anger simmered below the surface. "I don't make deals like that. Ethan is a child, not a commodity. If you're truly a father, you'd support him without demanding payment." Henry let out a barking laugh. "You think you're better than me? You step in, act like a saint. But you have no right to cut me out of my son's life." Jackson inhaled deeply, struggling to maintain composure. "No one is cutting you out if you behave responsibly. But if you try to use Ethan as leverage for money, I'll help Claire ensure you stay away from him. Legally." Henry's eyes flashed with fury, but he sensed Jackson's conviction. With a final sneer, he spat on the ground. "You'll regret crossing me," he growled and stormed off into the night. Jackson leaned against his car, exhaling slowly. A wave of sadness and protectiveness swept over him. He recalled his own father's absence during his childhood, how desperately he had yearned for paternal approval, only to be let down time and again. He didn't want Ethan to endure that kind of pain. Inside, Claire was startled to see Jackson enter the restaurant, looking agitated. "What happened?" she asked, concerned. Henry Jackson replied tersely. "He tried to shake me down for money." Claire's face fell, her stomach knotting. "I'm so sorry." Jackson shook his head, offering a reassuring smile, despite the tension in his eyes. "You have nothing to be sorry for. But I think we need to consider legal protection for Ethan. Henry's not stable." Claire nodded, knowing he was right. But the idea of a prolonged legal battle court, appearances, custody hearings terrified her. She dreaded the emotional toll it would take on Ethan. Yet the matter felt urgent. Henry's presence was a ticking time bomb that threatened to rob Ethan of the future he was just beginning to glimpse. Despite the mounting pressure from Henry, Ethan's musical progress soared. Madam Choi, impressed with his dedication, suggested that Ethan participate in a local youth piano competition. It was a small step, but an important one. Participating would grant Ethan performance experience, build his confidence, and possibly open doors to more advanced opportunities. The night of the competition, Claire stood backstage in a modest auditorium, heart pounding. She adjusted Ethan's little bow tie and smoothed his neatly pressed shirt. She tried to keep her voice steady, not wanting him to sense her anxiety. "Do your best, okay? It doesn't matter if you make mistakes. Just enjoy the music." Ethan smiled bravely. "I'll do my best, Mom." The backstage area bustled with other young pianists, some wearing expensive suits or glittering dresses, their parents fussing over them. Claire felt out of place among the affluent families. But then Jackson appeared, offering a quick, confident nod to Ethan. "You got this," he said, patting the boy's shoulder. A wave of relief washed over Claire. Jackson's presence was unwavering supportive. She suspected he might have made some generous donations to the organizers to ensure Ethan had a fair shot, but she tried not to dwell on that. The important thing was that Ethan had a chance to shine. When Ethan's turn came, the announcer called his name. The sound of polite applause greeted him as he walked onto the stage, tiny in the spotlight, dwarfed by the grand piano. Claire stood just off stage, hands clasped, breath held. She remembered her own recitals years ago. The bright lights, the hush of the crowd, the adrenaline rush. Ethan took a seat, adjusted the bench, and placed his hands carefully on the keys. The piece was a short Bach invention, followed by a snippet of a lyrical Chopin waltz, arranged for beginners. The first note rang out, and for a moment the hush of the audience felt tangible, like a living thing. He played smoothly, albeit with a few hesitations, his brow furrowed in concentration, but his overall performance displayed a sensitivity beyond his years. Claire's eyes misted over. She couldn't believe that only a few months ago Ethan was just tinkering on a cheap keyboard at home. Now he was here performing Bach to an audience of strangers. When he finished, applause rolled through the auditorium. Claire stepped forward and caught Ethan in a hug as he exited the stage. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered, her heart nearly bursting. Jackson, standing nearby, gave Ethan a discreet thumbs up. "You played beautifully," he said, genuine pride shimmering in his eyes. Although Ethan didn't place first, he received a respectable, honorable mention. The experience was invaluable. He left the auditorium, beaming eagerly, talking about how he wanted to learn more challenging pieces. Henry was notably absent. The victory of the evening was short-lived. The next day, Henry showed up at Claire's apartment, reeking of alcohol. He banged on the door, shouting obscenities, accusing her of turning Ethan against him. Ethan, who was in the living room, froze in terror. Claire's patience finally snapped. She called the police. When the officers arrived, Henry tried to bargain with them, claiming his parental rights, but his aggressive behavior and intoxication prompted them to escort him away. He was released a few hours later, but with a stern warning. Claire filed for a restraining order, supported by Jackson's legal team. In the days that followed, Henry made no contact. A strange calm settled over Claire's life. She poured herself into supporting Ethan's piano journey, returning to her own practice sessions on her mother's upright piano and working diligently at the restaurant. Meanwhile, Jackson continued to offer guidance and help, though Claire felt compelled to find a way to repay him. "I can't just keep accepting your generosity," she confided in him over coffee one afternoon. "It's too much. You repay me by doing exactly what you're doing," Jackson replied softly, stirring his cappuccino. "Raising a remarkable son using your talent. One day, you might pass on the same kindness to someone else. That's how we build a better world." Tears prickled at the corners of Claire's eyes. She found herself wanting to know more about him beyond the philanthropy, the business. But each time she tried to delve deeper, Jackson politely redirected the conversation. His past remained largely a mystery. She only learned snippets. His wife's name had been Sarah, and she died in a car crash. He had no children of his own. Perhaps that's why he found joy in supporting children like Ethan. It was a crisp autumn morning when Claire learned that Le Papillon Doré would be closing for renovations. The restaurant's owners, some of them rumored to be associates of famous chefs like Monique Leblanc, and even a silent partner that included Bill Gates's philanthropic arm, had decided on a major overhaul. All staff would be laid off for at least 3 months, with no guarantee of rehire. Claire felt her stomach plummet. The severance was minimal. She had rent Bill's Ethan's lessons to consider. She knew Jackson wouldn't let Ethan's lessons lapse, but she refused to let him shoulder all her financial burdens. She needed employment. Fate, however, had a curious way of intervening. Jackson, upon hearing the news, approached Claire with a proposition. "I'm investing in a new performing arts venue downtown," he explained. "It will host recitals, concerts, maybe even small theatrical productions. I could use someone with a background in both customer service and music to help manage it. Would you consider working there?" Claire was flabbergasted. "Manage? I've never managed anything in my life. I'm just a waitress with some piano skills." Jackson shook his head. "Don't undersell yourself. You're organized, hard-working. You understand the needs of musicians from your own experience. You'd be perfect as a front-of-house coordinator, or even an artistic liaison, someone to coordinate with performers, handle scheduling, ensure the venue runs smoothly." Her heart fluttered with a strange mix of excitement and trepidation. This was a huge leap from waitressing. Was she ready for such responsibility? Sensing her hesitation, Jackson offered a warm smile. "Think about it. You don't have to decide now. But I believe in you." That night, she sat at her mother's piano, trying to calm the whirlwind of thoughts. She played a quiet melody, something improvised raw, tinged with both hope and doubt. The notes reminded her that life was far too short to let opportunities slip away. She owed it to herself and Ethan to embrace this new path. When she told Ethan about it, his face lit up. "Then we can be around music all the time. You'll have a better job, right?" His innocence filled her with courage. A few weeks later, Claire found herself stepping into the half-renovated space that would become the Aurora Center for the Arts. Construction workers bustled around installing seats, testing lights, painting walls. The stage at the far end was modest, but well-designed with excellent acoustics, or so the architects promised. Jackson gave her a tour introducing her to the project manager, a stern but efficient woman named Ingrid. They discussed the timeline. The Aurora would open in 6 months with a gala premiere showcasing local talent. In the meantime, Claire would help with administrative tasks, from reaching out to potential performers and instructors to managing ticketing systems. It was daunting, but also exhilarating. Claire discovered that her instincts from years of waitressing, multitasking, memorizing requests, dealing with high-pressure situations, translated surprisingly well to this new role. Within days, she was setting up an organizational system to track performer inquiries and scheduling. She even offered input on the type of piano to purchase for the venue. Jackson watched her with a quiet satisfaction. He rarely interfered with her decisions, trusting her judgment. Occasionally she'd catch him gazing at her with a contemplative expression, as though he were weighing a thought he couldn't yet voice. "Everything going smoothly?" he asked one evening, dropping by unannounced. Claire set down a stack of documents. "Yes, actually. It's a challenge, but I like it. I never realized how much I missed being around musicians." He nodded. For a moment, silence stretched between them. Claire found her pulse quickening. Was there something more intimate in the way he looked at her? She pushed the thought aside, reminding herself that he was her boss, her benefactor. She didn't want to mistake gratitude for something else. Still, the tension was undeniable, just when Claire felt her life stabilizing. Ethan, thriving at lessons, her new job underway. Henry re-emerged yet again, this time in more alarming fashion. One night, after Ethan's lesson, they returned to the parking lot to find her car tires slashed. A crude note stuck under the windshield wiper read, "Don't forget who's really family." Claire trembled in fear. She immediately suspected Henry, though she lacked solid proof. Furious, she called the police to file a report. Jackson, upon hearing of the incident, insisted on paying for new tires and hired a private security firm to guard the Aurora Center at night. Fear gnawed at Claire. She hated that Henry lurked like a spectre, overshadowing every positive development in their lives. She considered pressing further charges, or at least informing her lawyer. But every time she imagined a grueling court battle, she flinched at the potential stress on Ethan. Jackson offered unwavering support, but Claire sensed a shift in his demeanor. His protective side emerged more strongly. On multiple occasions, he suggested that Claire and Ethan move to a safer neighborhood or accept a security detail. She resisted, not wanting to burden him further. But as the incidents piled up, late-night phone calls with no caller ID, a suspicious figure spotted near her building, her resolve began to weaken. The final straw came when Ethan confided that a strange man tried talking to him outside his school, asking if he remembered his dad. Panicked Claire agreed to let Jackson's legal team file an urgent request for a restraining order with stricter conditions. To her relief, the request was granted swiftly, and the court barred Henry from contacting or approaching Ethan. But the tension remained. Even with legal measures, Henry could still lurk in the shadows, a ticking time bomb. One night, after a particularly long day at the Aurora Center, Jackson offered to drive Claire and Ethan home. During the ride, Ethan fell asleep in the back seat, lulled by the hum of the engine. Claire, exhausted, yet grateful, found herself opening up to Jackson about her fears. "I want Ethan to feel safe, to have a real chance," she whispered. "I'm so tired of living on edge." Jackson reached out, gently squeezing her hand. "We'll do everything in our power to protect him." His voice was soft, caring. For a moment, Claire felt an overwhelming urge to lean on him, to let him shoulder some of her burdens. The warmth of his hand lingered on hers, sending an unfamiliar rush of emotion through her. "You've done so much for us," she murmured. "I don't know how we can ever repay you." "You don't have to," Jackson answered quietly. His eyes flicked from the road to her face, and she saw a tenderness there. "I lost someone I loved dearly. I'm not comparing situations, but there's a part of me that sees in you and Ethan the future that was taken from me. Helping you also helps me heal." Tears pricked at Claire's eyes. She turned to look out the window, the streetlights blurring in her vision. In that moment, she realized she felt more for Jackson than mere gratitude. She couldn't label it admiration, affection. The stirrings of love, but it scared and thrilled her in equal measure. Months of work culminated in the grand opening of the Aurora Center for the Arts. Posters adorned the city streets, announcing a gala evening featuring performances by budding talents and a special appearance from a celebrated concert pianist. High-profile guests, local celebrities and donors were invited. The entire venue sparkled under soft golden lighting. Claire buzzed with nervous energy, ensuring every detail was perfect. Ushers briefed programs placed neatly on seats, stage sound checks done. Ethan had been asked to perform a short piece as part of the opening act for the children's segment. He was thrilled, practicing tirelessly at home. Moments before the event began, Jackson found Claire backstage, adjusting Ethan's bow tie. He wore an elegant dark suit, looking every bit the distinguished patron of the arts. "Everything seems to be running smoothly," he remarked, giving her a proud nod. Claire smiled, heart pounding with excitement. "I can't believe it's finally happening." Ethan looked up at Jackson. "Thank you for helping us," he said quietly. The sincerity in his young voice made Jackson's eyes glisten. "You're most welcome, little maestro," Jackson replied, patting Ethan's head gently. "Now go out there and give them a show." When the lights dimmed and the velvet curtains drew back, Claire stood at the side of the stage, heart in her throat. The children's ensemble played first, their sweet harmonies filling the hall. Then it was Ethan's turn to step into the spotlight. He approached the shiny grand piano, the hush of the audience palpable. Claire watched a mix of motherly nerves and pride swirling in her chest. As he began to play a simplified movement from a Mozart sonata, a calm focus settled over him. His small fingers danced across the keys, coaxing out a poised, graceful melody. Every note resonated with the promise of what he might become with time and dedication. By the end of his performance, the audience erupted in applause. Claire wiped away tears, clapping so hard her palms stung. Ethan bowed, a radiant smile lighting up his face. In that moment, all the hardships, the fear, the uncertainty, they all faded in the glow of his accomplishment. After the final curtain call, the crowd mingled in the lobby, sipping champagne and discussing the evening's highlights. Industry professionals approached Ethan, congratulating him. Donors praised the Aurora's potential to become the city's cultural gem. Claire moved through the throng, her managerial instincts keeping her busy. Finally, she found a quiet moment alone with Jackson near the large floor-to-ceiling windows. The city lights glittered behind them, reflecting on the glass. She could sense a shift in the air, as though everything had led to this point. "Thank you," she said, keeping her voice soft. "For everything." He looked at her, a mixture of pride and affection warming his features. "You did all the real work here, Claire. You turned this place into something special." She took a step closer, her heart hammering. She saw his gaze flicker to her lips, and for a moment she was certain he wanted to kiss her. She felt the same pull, yet she hesitated. Was it right to mix gratitude with deeper feelings? Jackson's voice broke the silence. "I've come to care about you, both of you, very much. You've reminded me that there's still beauty and hope in this world." Claire felt her eyes well with tears, emotions swirling inside her. "We care about you too," she whispered. In that moment, the spark between them became undeniable. He leaned in, and their lips met in a tender, gentle kiss. A soft warmth spread through Claire's chest, a sensation of coming home. Outside, the city lights shimmered, but inside, for a brief moment, the world narrowed to just the two of them. When they pulled apart, a shy smile curved across Claire's face. She glanced around, half expecting to see gawking onlookers, but everyone else was still busy celebrating. In that instant, she understood that the next chapter of her life was just beginning. A chapter where she could reclaim her love for music, watch her son flourish, and perhaps share her heart with a man who had given them a chance to dream again. Over the next few months, Henry's restraining order held. He seemed to vanish from their lives, possibly moving to another city. Without that looming threat, Ethan blossomed even further. His teacher, Madame Choi, predicted he could audition for a scholarship at a prestigious conservatory in a few years. Claire, now fully employed at the Aurora, found daily fulfillment in nurturing other young artists, scheduling performances, and occasionally playing the piano herself for small events. Her father, proud of her accomplishments, visited often, and marveled at the restored piano that once belonged to Claire's mother. As for Jackson, he remained a steady presence. Their tentative romance grew grounded in mutual admiration and the shared goal of uplifting talent. Late nights often found them talking about hopes, fears, and the legacy they wished to create. Sometimes they'd sit at the empty auditorium after everyone had gone home, Claire playing a soft piece on the piano, while Jackson listened in the front row, applauding her every chord. In time, the public came to know about Jackson's philanthropic support of the Aurora, and rumors swirled about his relationship with its new manager. But for once, gossip felt inconsequential. They had built a small family, one brought together by music-second chances and the unwavering belief that even the most improbable dreams could come true. And so it all began that night at Le Papillon Doré, when a billionaire saw a waitress lift her son to the piano. A single moment of kindness sparked a journey of resilience, courage, and surprising love. Indeed, sometimes the simplest acts, like guiding a child's fingers over piano keys, can set in motion a new symphony of hope, resonating far beyond that first note, shocking an entire restaurant and echoing through many lives for years to come. Thank you for joining us on this extraordinary journey of hope, courage, and second chances, from Claire's trembling heart as she raised her son to the restaurant piano, to Jackson Morrow's simple yet powerful act of kindness. We've witnessed how a single moment can change countless lives. Throughout the struggles with Henry's interference, the blossoming of Ethan's musical gift, and the inspiring transformation of the Aurora Center for the Arts, one message remains clear. Dreams truly can be reignited, no matter how dark the night might seem. If this story moved you, please take a second to support us. Like this video. If you found yourself rooting for Claire and Ethan, share it so that their inspiring tale can reach others who need a spark of hope, and subscribe to our channel for more heart-warming stories that remind us of life's boundless potential. Until next time, keep believing and keep dreaming.